Hey besties, it is interview o'clock. So I just got back from an interview. My god. By the way, time right now is 4 p.m. I had to wake up 5 a.m. to get ready for this interview and go to somewhere far. Then I just go back. Like, oh my god, it's a lot. It's been a long day. Before I rest for the day, I thought to talk about the interview, the questions I was asked, especially if you are a newly qualified social worker, because they'll be very helpful. My voice has gone because it's been a long day. I wrote down the questions. If you are new here, you keep seeing a lot of this kind of content because the goal is to have as many sponsored jobs as possible and actually now be the one to pick the one to take. So now the role was a learning disability and autism team. By the way, all I do is adult social care, so it's not children's social care, it's adult. And the interview, I don't want to comment about the interview yet. Let me first give you the question and I'll talk to you about the interview towards the end of this video. So it first started with an oral test. So they gave me a case study, gave me paper and pen to write. They gave me 10 minutes. And when I think about it, I'm trying not to think about it too much because it's a little bit upsetting, because in 10 minutes, the case study involved Care Act, learning disability, mental health, capacity, consent. Like, there were too many things. And imagine a case study that was that like voluminous. Obviously, it would take some time for me to be able to like read and know what they're asking before I started writing. Do you know that by the time I had finished reading and planning what I would write, 4 minutes had gone? It's well, we thank God. We thank God. So my besties, some of your interviews may come as case studies first, then the interview. But now after that, they now start asking me the main question. So the first question I was asked was, can you describe how your experience, knowledge and skills, both personal and professional, prepare you for the role of a social worker, and why do you want to work for us? By the way, for this interview, as I do with a lot of interviews, I kept asking them, can you repeat the question? So my love, see, especially if it's your first interview, don't feel obligated to just responding when you don't fully understand what they're trying to ask. I noticed that for this interview, they would ask one question that will have many children, like one question that will have many parts and sub-parts. So one thing I did from the beginning of the interview was to tell them that I'll be scribbling down things. So I had my paper and my pen. So when they would ask me a question, I'll write it down and break it down. How does your experience, knowledge and skills, both personal and professional, prepare you for the role of a social worker? And why do you want to work for us? So I started by telling them about my lived experiences as a Nigerian and how that has prepared me. Then I related it to the reason why I wanted to be a social worker, basically because of my lived experiences and also my passion for supporting vulnerable people. I also talked about how seeing the job description, it aligned with my skills, values and experiences. I explained that to them. I talked about the values of the organization, because one thing you should do, make research about whatever county you're trying to get into. So I made research about their values. So I was telling them their values and linking into how their values align with my own values. I also talked about the demographics, because I had made my research about the age demographics of the city I'm applying into. I made my research about the ethnicity, sexual orientation, lots of those things. So even though I didn't break down all the statistics, I was able to make them know that, see, I understand the demographics that I'll be working with, I understand their challenges, and when I read the job description, it was like a no-brainer that I needed to apply for the job. So that was why I said that. They were like, one of them even said, you sound like you're really prepared. I'm like, yes, I did, because I'm not taking chances, my sister. So number 2 question was, give example of a strength-based assessment you completed. What did you consider and what steps did you take? Now I noticed that a lot of times these social work interview questions, they could be asking you something and be couching it with a lot of grammar. It's important for you to be calm, because when you're calm, you will be able to fish out what they are really asking. This question, they're asking about strength-based approach to practice. And I explained what that entails for me, focusing on clients' resources, strengths, abilities, as opposed to their deficits, and how empowering it is, how it helps people have autonomy and choice. I gave an example, and in that example, I supported this client to utilize their coping skills, build supportive relationships with their family and community, and that really helped them. I also explained what happened in that scenario. So there are different examples you can pick from. It can be how you supported someone to get involved in whatever hobbies that they like doing, how you encourage them to build relationships, how you work collaboratively with them. The list goes on and on. The third question, by the way, there were like 7 questions. The third question, in this role, you will be working with a lot of people, families, community, and professionals. What would you consider whilst working with them? I mentioned consideration of the individual's wishes, because the individual is best placed to judge their well-being. They are experts in their life. I talked about the needs of the individual, how I'll be able to meet the needs. I also talked about the support networks of the individual and family. I talked about the people that the individual will want to be involved in their support, the members of the family that the individual will not want any information being shared about them. I also talked about looking out for issues of isolation within the family, within the community, ensuring that the individual is protected from any form of social exclusion. I would also look at risk if there are safeguarding concerns, whether it's risk to the individual or risk from the individual or even any member of the family. I also mentioned encouraging positive risk taking for individuals. I talked about collaboration with professionals, multidisciplinary working. Then I forgot to talk about cultural competence. But if you have this kind of question, it's important to talk about cultural competence because you'll be working with various groups of people from different ethnicities, religious backgrounds, sexual orientation, and it's important to understand these things. Mind you, I'm giving you a lot of highlights of what I said because it's not possible for me to repeat what I said verbatim. But once you at least have an idea of what to say, it will guide you. So the first question was, give an example of how you see your role with respect to safeguarding. I don't think you would have a social work interview without having a question on safeguarding. I don't think it's possible. So I started by saying that I have a duty of care to safeguard individuals, and in fact, safeguarding is everyone's responsibility. I talked about the example where I safeguarded an individual. I highlighted the safeguarding principles of empowerment, prevention, protection, proportionality, partnership, accountability. I also mentioned some things I will consider in safeguarding inquiries, such as establishing facts, ascertaining the wishes of the individual, protecting them from risk of abuse or neglect. I mentioned about following up any action taken, also enabling them to recover from whatever may have caused them to have needed to be safeguarded, and finally ensuring that I do everything within my capacity to prevent a recurrence of the risk of harm. Oh, before that, I also talked about a local authority's duty to safeguard people that have care and support needs, that are at risk of harm, abuse, or neglect, and cannot protect themselves because of those needs. If you're a social worker, you understand what I'm saying. And if you're a social worker or you are an aspiring social worker and you are enjoying this video, please give me a thumbs up because that pushes this video to more people and it also helps you see more of this kind of content. So now the fifth question is, what would you take into consideration when assessing a person's capacity, and what would you consider when taking a best interest decision? I mentioned the 5 principles of the Mental Capacity Act, principle of presumption of capacity, ensuring that you are doing all practical steps to enable someone make a decision, ensuring that you're not judging someone on the basis of them making an unwise decision, ensuring that if it's clear that this person lacks capacity to make that decision, then you make a decision in their best interest. And even in that decision, you have to use the least restrictive measure. And I talked about the 2-stage capacity test. If you're a social worker, you know that. I also mentioned the example where I used this Mental Capacity Act in practice. Then for the best interest checklist, I mentioned that it's not a checklist based on what I would consider the best interest of the client, but based on the regulations of the law. So the best interest checklist highlights things like me checking out all the relevant circumstances, checking if this person will have capacity in the future, and if so, if the decision is not time specific, then we can wait for them to have capacity. ensuring that even the fact that the person lacks capacity, that does not mean they should not be involved in decisions. So empowering them to still be involved, checking past or present wishes of this client, checking that if it pertains to a life-sustaining treatment, nothing should be done to encourage their death. Also ensuring that you consider their beliefs, you consider other factors that they would have considered if they had capacity, consider if they've made future decisions or advanced decisions, checking if they have an attorney under a lasting power of attorney, or if they have a deputy appointed by a court of protection. Jesus, I remember all these things. So okay. Also, finally, if they don't have family or friends, then getting an IMCA involved. An IMCA is an independent mental capacity advocate. So that's why I said, and they seem quite impressed. The sixth question, working here would involve working with people that have experienced homelessness, domestic abuse, offending. How would you work with them? So I told them that actually this group of people are people I've actually worked with in my various organizations. I mentioned ensuring that I'm building relationships with them and I'm being holistic in my support. I talked about person-centered care, ensuring that I'm supporting them on the basis of their own unique strengths and abilities, and ensuring that whatever assessments I take would be holistic, outcome focused and coordinated. Whatever I do with them has to promote independence. It has to have this strength-based approach as a perspective. I would also use the biopsychosocial model of practice where I'm looking at things holistically. I mentioned also having empathy, and I'm effectively communicating with these clients. So that's what I said. Hey besties, I'm currently editing and I thought to come on here to add some points. Remember that in the question, I'm going to be supporting people that have experienced homelessness, domestic abuse, offending. So these are people that have been released from prison. Now, a common theme with all of these people is that they usually have stigmas. Now, in answering this question, it's going to be very important to talk about anti-oppressive practice, meaning when you're supporting this group of people, you are going to be anti-discriminatory and anti-oppressive, of course ensuring that you're not focusing on whatever negative labels they may already have, but you're drawing on their strength. So in answering this question, don't forget anti-oppressive practice. In my interview, for some reason I didn't even mention that, but I think one good thing about interview is that you may not remember every single thing, but if you remember the most important things, that's really what matters. For instance, can you guess if I got this job? Well, if you keep watching this video to the end, you would know whether I got the job or not. By the way, besties, if you need support regarding your interviews, you can book a session with me. You can click the link in the description box and you will see that service and other services that I run. So now for the seventh question, the role of a social worker is demanding. So how would you manage the demands while supporting your colleagues? I talked about supervision and the importance of supervision. I talked about knowing my deadlines, ensuring that I know my deadlines, because if you don't know your deadlines, how would you meet those deadlines? I talked about having a diary. I talked about my skill of prioritization, ensuring that I know what comes first. I'm very proactive. I talked about looking out for other team members, ensuring that everyone in the team is okay. I talked about peer learning, where I'm learning from my work colleagues also. I gave examples. I talked about taking leave as at when due so that I can prioritize my own well-being. I talked about self-care, ensuring that I go for massage regularly because that really helps me and it also builds my resilience. Then finally, do you have any question for us? Is there anything in my interview that you feel can shed more light on? This question is very good because sometimes in the interview, you may talk, but you may have missed something or you may have wanted to hear something else and maybe you just did not know or just forgot. That question can make them actually tell you something. So I asked and they said, oh, in a lot of my examples, I did not say much about learning disability. Remember, the theme here was learning disability, but a lot of the experiences I have actually borders around mental health. But I still have experiences with learning disability and autism. So as they said that, I mentioned it to them that I actually have learning disability experience. I mentioned the fact that I've worked as a support worker for autistic individuals. I mentioned what I did for them and that was good. So there was no other question. Hey besties, this is the reason why it's very important to ask very sensible questions. Now this question I asked gave me the opportunity to sell myself more. If I had not asked this question, I would have left the interview and my interviewers would be feeling like this person just talked a lot about mental health as opposed to learning disability. But this question allowed me the opportunity to sell myself again and remind them that I have experience with learning disability. And this particular question and the answer they gave me was also a learning curve for me, because yes, actually the bulk of my experience is in mental health field. However, when I'm doing an interview in future and it's not a typical mental health field, I should be able to use my other experiences as examples as opposed to focusing on strictly mental health. That way my interviewer will know that yes, even though most of my experience is in mental health field, I also have a diverse range of experiences. Now, I've released a video where I talked about 20 questions to ask after an interview. I'll be linking it up here, or you can just scroll through my channel, check the playlist called Jobs and Interviews, and you'll see the video on the questions to ask after an interview. So let's go on. I asked about the learning progression. So they mentioned to me that from the ASYE, I could basically progress depending on what I wanted, whether I wanted to be a best interest assessor or I wanted to be maybe a practice educator. So that was it. They thanked me, I thanked them for the interview, and that was it. So now I'm very grateful for how the interview went, although the interview was quite, like, amongst all the interviews I've gone for, this was the most unfriendly of them all. Like, they were not even, apart from the team manager, the other members of the panel, they were not even like cheerful. You know, the interviews I've had, they would make you feel comfortable, like they would just want to lighten the mood. This one, they don't even care. Like, there was just that aloofness. I don't know how to explain it. And yeah, and I found the questions a bit too much. I was able to answer them, but I found them like one question is like 4 questions. They're packing things. And one thing I did was to keep talking. And they were like, they were writing. And that's how you know you're doing a good job, because they were writing. Once they're looking at you like that, it means you are going off. But once they're writing, because they're writing what you're saying that is meeting what they expect you to say. So that's it, my loves. I'll be hearing from them later in the week. And obviously, by God's grace, I'm hearing a good news. I need to go rest. If you've enjoyed this video, I also have a playlist for content like this, so that you will just not stress yourself. You just keep watching. All right, my loves, I'm tired.
Florence, how are you doing?
I'm fine. Sorry, I missed your calls.
Well, obviously, I'm calling in about your interview yesterday.
Yes.
First of all, how do you think you done?
I think I did well.
You did absolutely fantastic, and we would like to offer you the role. Is that you accepting it?
Yeah.